Hello, friends. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Fort Worth Roots. This is a podcast for Fort Worthians who love our city and want stories from our community's creators. Do you love Fort Worth? Do you want to know what's happening in your backyard? Then this podcast was made for you. If this is your first time checking out the show, know that we interview people from all over the community. The parameters are as long as they are creating something and making our community what it is that we enjoy, what we love, what we appreciate about Fort Worth and the DFW area. But all of our guests, whether it's the announcer at the Cowtown Coliseum for the last 25 years, an author that we really appreciate, someone working on an indie film project, a local entrepreneur, or even one of the many artists that we've had on the show. You can find them on our social media. On Facebook is probably the most up-to-date and active page that we have. We are on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, and YouTube under Fort Worth Roots. But to keep up with all of our musicians and all of our guests that have been on the show, our Facebook page, Fort Worth Roots Podcast Facebook page. Whenever somebody has a show coming up or a new single to release or anything that they have going on professionally, we put it on that page so that you can see it. On the weekends, whenever Morgan and I are out traveling through Fort Worth, we'll pull up the Fort Worth Roots Podcast Facebook page just to see what's going on, because there might be something that slipped my mind or I'm just not remembering off the top of my head. This weekend was a really good example of that. I think it was Friday. We were out having an early dinner, and I just pulled up the page to see where our friends were playing at. And it turned out that Carrie and Paul Smith from the band Late to the Station were playing at Kung Fu Saloon right down the street. So we just popped in there real quick, sat with them for about an hour, had a drink, listened to some great music, and got to see our friends. So if you haven't already done it, check us out on social media, whichever one you like to use. I know not everybody's into Facebook, not everybody's into TikTok, but whichever one you're using, find us on that, and we'll try to keep you up to date with what's going on with the Fort Worth Roots podcast, as well as our guests that have been on the show. Shout out to our friends at Squad STX Boys Camping. All boys ages 11 through 16, 100% outdoor, overnight camping, hiking, wilderness skills, land navigation, laser tag missions. This is awesome. They do it down there next to Glen Rose and Dinosaur Valley. It's supposed to be an alternative to Boy Scouts. Here's their mission statement. Squad STX is an overnight primitive camping, hiking, orienteering, laser tag course for boys designed by the U.S. Army infantry officers as an alternative to Boy Scouts and traditional summer camp. We develop strong leadership skills through squad competitions, time-tested military training methodologies, and situational training exercises. Now, these guys are not sponsors. This is just something that we did, an initiative we took. We had this block of time at the front end of the episode. I said, why don't we reach out to some veteran businesses in our area and see if they'd like us to talk about them. And Dustin from Squad STX Boys Camping was the first one to get back to me. Don't put it off. Don't wait. Don't say, I'll do it later, because you won't. You'll forget. Do it now. SquadSTX.com. River Oaks Spring Fest Car Show, Saturday, April 30th, held at the beautiful Camp Carter. Address on that is 6200 Sand Springs Road, Fort Worth, Texas. River Oaks, if you don't know where River Oaks is, it is right next door to the military base, JRB Carswell. Easy to find. Anyway, I'll have the address in the show notes so you can find it. And you can find them on Facebook, too. They have a Facebook page, River Oaks Springfest Car Show. They're going to have vendors and a pop-up market, games and events, benefiting the Friends of the River Oaks Animal Shelter and YMCA Camp Carter. This is a free event. You don't have to pay a dime. It's going to be awesome. Our guest today is a film producer, an author, a man of many talents. He spent 20 years teaching right here in Fort Worth and recorded with the Fort Worth Roots podcast to talk about his books and just to hang out and introduce himself to our listeners. This was a really cool experience for me because I picked up, or rather I was given two of his books, got to read all the way through one and started a second. And then I got a chance to sit down with the author and ask him questions and talk about the books. And that was just a really cool experience. And from now on, that's what I've got to do. I've got to read the books before I sit down with these authors so that I can talk to them about these books. So the first book that I picked up by our guest today is called Fort Worth's Rock and Roll Roots. And this picks up in the early 60s. This is kind of what that book's about. In 1964, Ed Sullivan introduced the Beatles to America. Across the country, teens were glued to their TV sets and witnessed a turning point in rock and roll history. A vibrant and creative teen scene sprang up all across the country. The scene in Fort Worth, Texas produced an exceptional burst of creativity in songwriting, musicianship. Weekend concerts and battles of the bands drew thousands of fans. Primitive teen recordings were pressed into 45s and received radio airplay in rotation with national acts. Local television shows featured live bands. Fashions changed with go-go girls' skirts growing shorter. Long hair became the style for women and men, and the seeds of the counterculture were planted and flourished. The music of this generation birthed every rock subgenre for the next 40 years: acid rock, heavy metal, punk, new wave, grunge. And today's musicians still reach back to these recordings for inspiration. This book is told through the lens of Fort Worth, and there's actually a ton of connections. Our rock and roll roots right here in Fort Worth and the DFW area. But this isn't just a history book. It talks about bands that were formed in garages around here. I mean, some of these people are still in our community today, and it's just really interesting to see history told through this special lens that we can all relate to here in the Fort Worth area. He cites a lot of different kind of historical establishments that were here in the Fort Worth area, bars and clubs and things like that, had a national influence. So anyway, just a really great book. I hope you get a chance to read it. I'm going to try to put a link in the show notes. I think those Amazon links are just really ridiculously long, but I'll put it in there anyway. But you can always just go onto Amazon, type in Fort Worth's Rock and Roll Roots, and find our guest book. An incredible read. I really do highly suggest this for anybody in the Fort Worth area. Of course, you don't have to be in Fort Worth to enjoy this book, but it is going to be far more relevant if you're a Fort Worthian. Some really badass pictures in here, too. Me being ADD like I am, I'd like a book with some good pictures in it. Anyway, this one's got it. Some really cool stuff. Second book I picked up by our guest today is called We're for Smoke: Outlaws and Outliers of Panther City. This is a totally different book than Fort Worth's Rock and Roll Roots. You know, that's a really fun, laid-back adventure into rock and roll. So obviously that one's fun and upbeat, and this one's a little more serious. It's also the history of Fort Worth. This book starts off crazy as hell. Like it just throws you right into a pretty dark situation. But it's a good reminder that, you know, Fort Worth had to grow into what it is today. It wasn't always this clean, safe environment as many large industrial cities like Fort Worth were not back whenever this story takes place. And our author and guest explains the name of the book, what that meant. But We're for Smoke was on the flag, the original Fort Worth flag in the early days, in the early 1900s. So anyway, you'll be interested to hear what that means. It's not actually covered in the book, but now that you're listening to the author talk about this book, you're going to have a special insight to this story. This was an equally enjoyable book. We're for Smoke is also something you need to pick up, and I'll again put the link in there, and if it doesn't work, just go to Amazon, type in We're for Smoke. Great way to support our guest today, but also just a really great read. These are two books, Fort Worth Rock and Roll Roots and We're for Smoke, are definitely two books that you're going to want to add to your collection. And since I'm thinking about this, another shout out to our two patrons that are currently contributing to the show. Thank y'all so much for supporting Fort Worth Roots, Angela Walker and Justin Matenta. When we've got people that enjoy the show so much and they believe in our mission at Fort Worth Roots to the point where they want to make a financial contribution, it is the most sincere compliment. So thank you to our two patrons. And also a big thank you to you. Every single time you download even one of these episodes or stream it off your favorite podcast platform or listen to it on YouTube, you're making Fort Worth Roots podcast stronger every time. So thank you for that. Thank y'all for being here and streaming this episode. All right, that's enough out of me. Let's give it up for our guest today, a pillar of the Fort Worth community, incredible storyteller, Mark A. Nobles. Thank y'all for being here. Let's start the show. Well, first of all, thank you for doing this with me. I've been excited to sit down and record with you since I met you, and then I dove into your books, and then it became a necessity.
Well, I appreciate you having me. This is the first podcast I've ever done. Mm-hmm. I'm an old guy, so this new technology, I'm always excited. It's like, this is cool. Let's see what we're doing.
We're at the Roofing Solutions by Darren Hauk. I always have trouble with his last name.
Everybody does.
It's Hauk, right?
Hauk.
Okay. And so this is my second time recording in here. Last time you were running out the door, though. You had somewhere to be, so
I wasn't
able to talk you into a recording that day.
Nope, I think I was going to Dallas.
Oh,
I was
really?
telling
Okay.
you before that my girlfriend's over there, and so I think I was heading out early that day.
Yeah. So let's start with a little bit of back history on you. You're from the area. You grew up here in Fort Worth.
Yeah, well, I was born here. Like in my writer's bio, it says I was born a block off of Jacksboro Highway, which is infamous. And I was born about a block and a half off of Jacksboro Highway in a clinic over here. Actually, technically, I guess in Lake Worth. So, Fort Worth has always been, it's my home. I was raised to be, because my dad was in the Navy.
Okay.
So I kind of grew up from birth, I was less than a year old and we were in Ethiopia.
Oh, wow.
For 2 or 3 years. And then I grew up all over the country. And so it was instilled in me that even if you're living in California or Maryland, you're a Texan.
Yeah.
And we came home all the time. And so, yeah, I've been back in the area since I was 13. So since 73 when I moved back.
And were you in the River Oaks area when you came back?
No, one side of my family's kind of from Azle and out in there. And my other side, at the time, they lived in Alvarado.
Okay.
And my mom, bless her heart, she didn't want me living in Fort Worth in the city.
Dangerous.
There was danger and drugs and gangs. And so
she wasn't wrong, was she?
Well, no. Well, she made a slight miscalculation because when we first got back, we were living in Alvarado, but there's no work out there. So she was driving into Fort Worth all the time.
Oh, my God.
So we moved to Crowley, which is pretty close.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the heart to tell her that there were drugs in Fort Worth, and they came to Crowley and out there to buy them. So we just kept that to ourselves.
Right.
But I've been in the area pretty much ever since. I flunked out of half a dozen colleges before I finally graduated. So in and about and around.
Yeah. And so what did you do for work in the early years?
Man, anything really. Right after, I thought I wanted to be a teacher. And so I went back after I got my bachelor's and got my certificate, but then I found out that the public schools were not, I did not want to do that.
Right.
And so I just kind of bummed around. I was a manager at Walmart for a few years. I worked at Color Tile for people that have grown up here, know the Color Tile business. They're long gone now. But then I did actually go into teaching. I spent 20 years teaching at a real small private high school here in Fort Worth called West Academy. And those were some of the 20 of the best years of my life. I love those people. I love those kids. That's been long enough now that it's cool, but it's weird because those kids, they're always 16 and 17 in my head.
Right.
And I run into them, at the Albertsons, and they're 40. And I'm like, you can't be 40. I'm 40.
Yeah.
But I'm not, and they're not. And it's just weird.
Yeah. Well, the first time I experienced that, one of my buddies, his niece, was, I think, 12 years old the last time I'd seen her. And I went off, joined the Army, did a bunch of stuff, came back to my hometown, and whenever I came over to his house, I knocked on the door, and some woman opened the door, and I went, who are you? She said her name, and I was like, no, that's not right. It doesn't add up.
No. Yeah, you're 12.
Well, when did you start writing? Was that while you were in academics?
I was writing as soon as I could hold a pencil.
Yeah.
Stories have always fascinated me. And then when I found out that, anybody could do it, I was like, well, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
So, I've been writing stories of some sort, really almost as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
And I love making things up. I will do, you can ask my friends, I will do almost anything if I think, A, it won't kill me, and B, I can get a story to talk about, to tell later.
Yeah.
So it's like, heck yeah, let's do it. Sounds good to me.
Give me a good example. What have you done just to get a story out of?
No. Well, in college, we hopped a train one time, and then it got to going too fast, and I was going to college at that point in Sherman. And
now what did you do? You just jumped on the side and rode on the side of it?
Well, no, we got into kind of a car, and then it was going slow, and then it was not going slow, and it was cold. And girlfriends weren't too happy when we
you brought women with you too.
No. But we jumped off, and we were already in Dallas, and so we had to call them back in Sherman at 3 a.m.
Oh my God! How long were y'all on that train?
I don't know. There were other things involved that kind of bent time. So
this sounds like a hell of a story, though.
It is a hell of a story. It's a great story, and then, like I say, I mean, and it was, not all of it was fun at the time, but it's cool to talk about later.
Yeah,
We survived it.
Yeah, the things we do when we're kids.
Yeah.
Well, the first book I cracked into was Fort Worth's Rock and Roll Roots, and I think I read this entire thing in one setting. I couldn't put it down.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. That was such a fun project, and that's really a spin-off book.
For the Image of America?
Well, yeah, that's
a series, right?
That's a series. I mean, there's a bunch about, they do local history books.
Right.
But I produced a documentary called Tina Go-Go.
That's right.
And Melissa Kirkendall, who's a legend in Fort Worth in the music industry anyway, she was a club owner and has done she's in the Fort Worth Weekly has a music hall of fame. She's in their hall of fame.
Now, how do we get to this documentary? Because you and Darren were telling me about it, and I haven't tried to look it up yet. But where can we find it?
It's on. You can buy it on Amazon. You can search it on. I've got a copy up for free that you can just watch on YouTube.
Okay.
Just Google Tina Go-Go. I will tell people that when you just Google Tina Go-Go, you need to be careful.
Oh God.
Because other things come up as well that are not maybe family friendly.
Yeah.
But Tina Go-Go, and the full title is A Little Story About Rock and Roll History. So there was an article in the Sunday paper when we had a real newspaper in Fort Worth, about these two local guys had spent like 15 years searching out and researching and tracking down all these people that had recorded songs from like 64 to 68. And the record series is called, oh my gosh, I just went blank.
That's okay.
I'll come back to that. But anyway, there's a great set of CDs or records. You can get them either way. And they had researched and met a lot of these people, tracked them down. They had gathered photographs. They had found the old 45s. A lot of them were original. Some of them were covers. And when the Beatles went on Ed Sullivan in February of, I think, 63, it just changed everything. I mean, people went berserk.
Yeah.
And every stinking teenager in America went out and went to Sears. A lot of them went to Sears and bought these old Silvertone amps and cheap guitars and drum sets. This was the first time, like before, like Elvis, it had been Elvis, or Sinatra, it had been one person had become an icon in the music industry. This was the first time a band that wrote their own original songs had come over and just captured the world, really, but here in the United States. And so there were literally hundreds of thousands of these garage bands, and that's where the garage band term came from. After the 50s and the boomers, everybody was moving to the suburbs. So these kids come home and they want to form their own band. Well, Mama does not want them in the living room. Mama wants them out in the garage. Yeah. So they became garage bands.
Yeah.
But a lot of these people, and a whole industry sprang up around that thing. There were Tina Go-Go's, that's where the name of the film comes from, that were just for teenagers. And the biggest one in Fort Worth, they held over in the cattle barns, I think, over at Will Rogers. And on Saturday nights, they were drawing like 1,500 to 2,000 teenagers to these things. And they had Battle of the Bands. These bands were, like I say, the Beatles were their inspiration, so they weren't just playing covers. They were writing their own tunes, and then they would record them and come out with a 45. And I talked to these guys, and they said, it was just crazy that, Monday through Friday, they're a sophomore at, Western Hills or Arlington Heights. They're just a little dweeb running around the school, nobody paying any attention to them. But on Friday and Saturday nights, they were playing these Tina Go-Go's, and it was just like the Beatles. There were girls screaming and throwing things at them, and, there were hundreds, if not, over 1,000 people listening to them. And the radio industry was completely different back then. There weren't corporations.
Right.
So each radio station had their top 10. And it's just really funny. I mean, there's pictures in the book and in the film of, KFJZ's top 10. And it'd be Beatles, Stones, and Larry and the Blue Notes.
Yeah.
Who were 5 kids from, Haltom, or I can't remember where they were from. But, so they're on, their records being played on the air. They're playing to packed houses all over the place. It was just an entire scene. And these 2 guys had gathered up over 70 recordings. And so I read the article. I thought the whole thing was just fascinating. I had never heard of it before.
Right.
And they were doing a release party for the records are called Fort Worth Teen Scene. Yeah, I'm glad I remembered that. And you can find them everywhere. I highly encourage getting this 3 sets. There's like 73 or 74 songs, and they are all killer. That's awesome. Have been playing those CDs in my car, and one time a friend of mine who's a Kinks nut, we're riding around, and I'm playing, and it's a local band, and he's like, I thought I'd heard every Kinks song that was ever released. What is that? I'm like, that ain't the Kinks. That's whatever. It's the Elite, from Fort Worth in 1966 or whatever.
Right.
The music was just phenomenal. And when they released it, they had like 20 of these guys come to a record store here in Fort Worth. It's now gone. And, they had a little release party for them. So I just went and sat there just to see them and meet these guys. Mm-hmm. And at first it was just a bunch of old guys, and they were just kind of sitting there, and it was fun and blah, blah, blah. And then there's a local guy named John Nitzinger. Look him up sometime.
John Nitzinger?
Johnny Nitzinger.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. He went on, most of these guys just played in high school, maybe in college, and then they went on to their lives.
Right.
But a lot of them went on and made entire careers and got big time. Johnny at one point had, he had a record deal with Columbia or Capitol or somebody. I mean, he played, that was his life. Mm-hmm. He's phenomenal, and he's a character. I mean, he's what you think of when you think about rock and roll star, And so they were kind of just talking and telling stories, and it was pretty low key. And this guy named Roger, told a story about a battle of the band or something, and Johnny just looked over and he called BS. He's like, that's not happened. That's bull. And Roger just looked back at him and said, oh, because they were in the 2 biggest bands at the time. Johnny was in the Barons, and Roger was in a band called the Elite. And they were always, fighting it out to win these prizes at the Battle of the Bands and stuff. And so Roger was like, oh, nuh-uh. And then it's like their eyes rolled up in the back of their heads. They were all 17 again. And they just started going at it good-naturedly.
Yeah.
Everybody was friends. They started having fun, and they went off stage. They were just themselves all of a sudden. And everybody else jumped in. And I was like, there's a film. Those guys are good. They can do this. And I hadn't heard one song. So I bought the CDs, introduced myself to everybody, told them what I was trying to do to put together this film, and then I went out and got in my car, and I didn't have a CD player in my car at that time, and I'm just driving home going, please don't let this music suck. Please don't let this music suck. And I got home and I put them in, and what came out of the speakers, I was dancing. I was like Tom Cruise, and I was just dancing around the house going, I've got a winner here. And so
I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yeah.
Because as I was reading Morgan walked into the house, and I was sitting there with your book in my hand, and I was playing music, and she goes, I don't know how the hell you can listen to music and read a book at the same time. I said, well, the music is kind of about the book. The book's kind of about the music. So it ties in.
Yeah.
I was trying to set the scene for myself. So I said, Alexa, play music from 1968, and she's playing billboards from 1968. And so I had the volume down low or whatever, but thoroughly enjoyed this. I can't tell you how much. One thing that I thought was fascinating right from the word go at the beginning of the book, the history is contextual. Like it matters what's going on around you. And that's how you frame the beginning of this book. This is what was going on in the country, and this is kind of where everybody's headspace was at, and that contributed greatly to the match that struck the kindling. Mm-hmm. The situation was just right. People needed a relief from the looming nuclear threat from Russia, which is funny that we're talking about that now with recent events.
Yeah,
Kennedy had just been assassinated right down the street. Mm-hmm.
there were several things going on that just kind of made it the right time and the right place for the Beatles to show up and steal everybody's attention.
Well, and that is exactly correct. And you can see that theme all throughout. I just recently, last year, finished writing the script for a documentary that should be out this spring or summer called The Birth and History of Western Swing. Mm-hmm. And it was locally produced again, and it turned out really, really well. I've seen the cut so far, and I was talking to the guy about writing the script for it, and I knew a little bit about Western Swing. It wasn't, completely in my wheelhouse, but I'm a Fort Worth guy, so I know a little bit about all kinds of Fort Worth history.
Right.
And Crystal Springs was just down the street here in River Oaks, and that's where the Doughboys, the Texas Doughboys, got their start. They were working for advertising for Burris Mills. They had a local radio show on WBAP, and then they'd play these dances out here at Crystal Springs.
And what was Crystal Springs?
It started out, it was actually a gravel pit. And the guy was digging the gravel out, and every time he'd dig it, it would fill up with crystal clear water.
Oh, okay.
And that's not good for the gravel industry, So he's like, what am I going to do here? And so he just dug out a pool, and he had a Crystal Springs. Burkers Lake is just down the street here, too, in River Oaks.
Okay, but those are two separate things, right?
Two separate things. Crystal Springs is really more off of 183, just down the street here, on the edge of River Oaks. So he just dug it out and had the springs and would have people come out, and they'd picnic and swim. And then he built a pavilion and a stage and started having bands out. And he brought in the Texas Doughboys, and it just took off. And these guys talk about, the main thing about Western Swing is it is pure dance music. It's not, there's no politics, there's no protests. It's dance music.
Yeah.
And this is at the beginning of the Depression, and then going into World War II. And a lot of these guys in their interviews would talk about, it's like, that's, life was hard. Everybody's broke.
Yeah.
They're not sure how to feed themselves. And then there's a crazy man in Europe, and we, something's fixing to go down. And we just wanted to get up there and take those cares away for 2 or 3 hours. And, nobody clapped. Like, it's weird. These guys would talk about it. Later on, when they got big and they would play more like concert things, they weren't used to that. They didn't, why aren't y'all dancing?
Yeah.
But that was all about getting people to dance and have fun. They were having fun. And so, you're exactly right. A lot of the great things come out of, weird or bad circumstances.
But you had, anytime you look at history, and both of these books are all about history, you're not getting the full story unless you take into account the context and what's going on.
That's definitely.
So I'm so glad that you started the book off that way.
Yeah.
So, Fort Worth Rock and Roll Roots and the documentary. I'm going to try to look that up on YouTube and include a link in the show notes for this episode. So going from that book,
it changes
into
the tone a little bit.
We're for Smoke.
Yeah.
It was like hitting the gas.
Yeah. One of these things is not like the other. That is for sure.
Yeah, and I at the very beginning, the company that you published through even had a little bit of a warning at the very front. I won't read it off, but there is a warning in here from the publisher at TCU. What is it?
TCU Press.
Right, and they just wanted to make sure people knew that, hey, there's a little bit of language in here, but it matters. It's part of the story.
Right.
It's part of our history.
Right.
And I thought that was really important that, you can't take away what happened by deleting history. You can't just whitewash everything. Mm-hmm. So, and I was reading out loud so that Morgan could hear some of what was in your book. And she said, some of those words are kind of hard to pronounce. And I said, well, it's, he's using slang from that time. And so they're foreign words to me, but that's why you hear me tripping up on it a little bit.
Yeah.
She wasn't making fun of my literacy. She was identifying that there were some words in there that she didn't know, and that enriches the entire story. You're stepping back into a different time in history. So
one of the most
languages was different then.
Language, and again, it's weird that you picked that up. one of the most fun things about writing historical fiction is, I spend a lot of time. I've got all kinds of books at the house. I'm always looking for books. I'm on the internet looking for slang, and I need slang from 1909.
Yeah, right. Very specific.
Yeah, and again, you're putting it lends color to the book. Mm-hmm. It lends an authenticity to it. I think it makes it fun. Anytime you hear a new word. When I taught high school, you always get, as a teacher, why do I have to learn this? This is not going to help me. And the way I would answer that for them is, the more you know, the more knowledge and information you have, the richer your life is going to be.
Right.
And the example I give, and I think it's the perfect example, is, everybody's seen The Simpsons. Mr. Burns, the joke about Mr. Burns is he's old, he's over 100 years old, and he talks funny anyway, and he uses a lot of these slang terms. But one of the funny things he does, if you know, is whenever he answers the phone, he says, ahoy. He doesn't say hello. He says ahoy.
Yeah.
And so I went and looked that up, because the people that write The Simpsons, The Simpsons is whatever and his accordion cowabunga man, but those people aren't dumb.
Right.
They're educated, they're smart, they got there because they know what they're doing.
Right.
And so I found out the word hello was actually invented for the phone.
Really?
So if you see somebody,
like I've heard that before.
Yeah, if you see in a movie from the Wild West or back and somebody says hello, that's incorrect. And there was a big, just like we're going through on the internet now, nobody knows how to act on the internet.
Right.
And that's causing, I'm not going to go there.
Right.
But anytime you have a new technology, a new communication technology, you have to invent an etiquette. And so the phone was brand new, and I don't know why. Everybody apparently just said ahoy when they were talking to each other. I don't know why they needed something new, but there were two factions, and one faction had this newfangled word, sort of like our LOL or whatever, which I think, in 100 years, LOL is going to be a word.
Yeah.
I would bet my mortgage on it right now. It will just be swallowed up by the language, and it won't be letters anymore. It'll be a word.
Yeah. As common speak.
Yeah. And so somebody, I don't know how, they came up with hello, and these other people were like, no, ahoy. And Alexander Graham Bell actually was a ahoy champion, but obviously we all know that ahoy lost.
Yeah.
And it's hello. But so I would tell them, when I watched The Simpsons and Mr. Burns picked up the phone and goes, ahoy, I know that's a joke.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, it's a weird joke.
Yeah.
And you're reaching, you're writing a joke that maybe out of your audience, 15 people out of millions are going to get, but it's a joke. And
it's better for them since they know it.
And it's better for me. I got an extra laugh out of that episode.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
We'll learn stuff.
A very good example.
Yeah,
very solid example.
Thank you.
So I'm at the part now. Hopefully I didn't lose my bookmark. Let me find this guy's name. Tom Lee. I'm in the middle of the story in 1913, where a African American shoe polish. What's the term for that?
Yeah, I guess shoe shine.
Shoe shine. Yeah. Kind of lost his ass in a gambling spree one night and decided he was going to take charge of his life for the first time, and went on a shooting spree here in Fort Worth. And it's something I had to pat you on the back about. I've never read a book that was put together like this, where you tell the story and then you show the examples. And before Tom Lee, the sheriff, first name's Kid. I can't remember his last name. Kid Yates. The way you told that part of the story. So Kid Yates, you first you give your version of the story, or how you told the story, and then you have the version of what Kid Yates told the jurors was his story. And then you told the story how it was in the newspaper. And so you get three versions of the same story. And I don't know, that was incredible, because that really is what happens in the media or in life. There's more than one story whenever things start to develop or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that was incredible. I'd really appreciated that.
Thanks.
But yeah, our boy here that goes on the shooting spree, and that was, what I appreciate about these stories is that they happened here in our backyard, and it highlights what this place was like in the early 1900s, and where we are today, and how much better it's gotten. So
yeah, well, but how no matter how much things change, they all stay the same.
Right.
One of the things that I picked for this, well, the reason I wrote the book was I started out to write a book about Bessie Williams.
Okay. Now Bessie Williams, and then there's a Bessie Yates.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bessie Williams is the girl earlier in the book.
Yes, yes. And I just couldn't pull it off. And so I had, from other research, I had all these other stories and things around. So I'm like, how can I, pull this off and make it something different? And I was talking to some archivists and historians and stuff and different people. And this time period, everything in the book, well, 95% of the things in the book take place between 1910 and 1919. And that was we were in the middle of the second industrial revolution.
Okay.
And so the whole country, that was the beginning of us as a country moving from an urban society, from a rural society to an urban society. People were moving to the city to get these jobs in these factories.
Right.
And again, like I was talking about with the phone and how technology affects everything, this technology, when industry started getting really, really big, it just threw everything topsy-turvy. And Fort Worth in particular was fighting through, they were wanting to change their image from, a wild and woolly Wild West, cowboys riding their horses, shooting their 6 guns into saloons,
right,
to a modern industrial
safe place for a family.
Yeah. And then I was at the Fort Worth Library, and I saw the cover of the book features Fort Worth's first city flag.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let me show you here. So this is 1912 is when this flag came out, and it's "We're for Smoke" is their tagline, which is where I got the title of the book. And if you look here right in the middle, this is an outline of the skyline of Fort Worth as it looked in 1912.
Okay.
And then at the top, it's just solid black,
showing the industrial
air
progress. It was progress back then.
If your city was covered in soot and smog,
you were getting stuff done.
You were balling, baby.
Yeah.
And so that's where it came from, and that's where everybody in the book is fighting their own battle with how where they're kind of caught in society and how society's playing on them.
Now, do you go into explaining that later in the book? Like I said, I'm about halfway through, but talking about the city flag and the image depicted there, do you go into detail about that in the book?
Again, I appreciate you bringing that up. That would have been a nice thing for me to include in the introduction.
Well, now they know.
Well, now they know. So no, I did not.
Because I was hoping that at some point there would be some.
This is
because it's such an interesting title, and so I thought for sure there'd be.
Yeah, you would think.
But that's okay. Now we know, and everybody listening to the podcast knows now.
It's my first novel. Made a little mistake there. Should have explained it.
Great.
But yeah,
great.
Yeah, that's where it comes from.
Well, now I'll know something that other people don't know whenever they pick this up and read it, and I can say, well, here, right here. That's wildly interesting too, because changing of the times. If a city was to, take a picture and try to play up their pollution, it would not be a positive at all. It would not go harsh negative.
But we're still doing the same thing with we're trying to have these factories but burn cleaner. Now we're advertising, we're doing it cleaner now, mm-hmm. and so and that's a good thing. And it's just it shows the pendulum going back and forth.
So we've got a third book on the table today.
Yeah,
and this one has your name on it too.
Yep. This is called Metaphor in a Hat. It's a collection of short stories. From the short stories are from probably just a few months ago. It didn't just come out. This book first came. I self-published this one. It's available on Amazon.
Okay, there'll be links in the show notes.
Yeah, and it's just short story. And these are my more regular kind of literary short stories.
Uh-huh.
I write a lot of horror. I've got some a horror collection hopefully coming out this summer or this fall.
Okay.
So these are most of these. Some of them are a little weird and have a little magic in them and some horror.
So, but your book here, Metaphor in a Hat, this is your most recent contribution?
Yes. Yeah. Well, like I say, it came out a couple of years ago, but it was about half the size.
Oh, okay.
So I just threw in all the newer stuff and redid it, and so it came out. So yeah, this one's done. It's finally big enough. Next one will be something different.
So for people looking this up, there's 2 versions of this book.
The old version is gone.
Okay.
It should not be, because like I say, I self-published this. So if you buy it off of Amazon or in any of the other places where you can get books, they'll print you out this one.
Yeah. Now with these short stories here, is this just a collaboration of stories you've written over the years?
Yeah, a lot of them are sort of autobiographical. Family stuff, you pull from wherever you can pull, right? Because you need stories. There's a story in here called Meyer Island, which is when I got my first kiss.
Okay.
In the 4th grade in Vallejo, California, and then I don't know if I should say this on the air. A couple of these. There's a story in here called Caddy Corner House.
Okay.
I love Tom Waits. Tom Waits is one of my guys.
Okay.
And so I like to take some of his stories, some of his songs, and then I just make up a story.
That's awesome.
Using not really the story he's telling, but using some of the same verbiage. Caddy Corner House is one of those. Sort of my homage to Tom Waits. A Night in Robert Lee. When I was a teenager, I was driving around out in West Texas. We were just getting out of Fort Worth, and I was wearing an Eric Clapton t-shirt. I had just seen him at Tarrant County Convention Center maybe a few months before.
Okay.
So I'm wearing this brand new Eric Clapton concert t-shirt, and I go in to buy a 6-pack of beer and pay for the gas, but he couldn't pay at the pump. You had to go inside and pay. And there was just an adorable young woman out in Muleshoe, out in Robert Lee. It was a tiny little, just a grease spot out in West Texas, and she looked at me and looked at my t-shirt, and she's like, do you work with Eric Clapton?
Of course you do.
Of course I do. She asked if I was in the band, and I wasn't that brave, but I told her I was a roadie, and we'd just done a show in Fort Worth, and we were heading out west, and blah, 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 blah. And how that evening went. So, I mean, a lot of them are biographical, and some of them are just made up stories. Chasing Nova is about a guy whose wife runs away from him.
In a Nova?
In his prize Nova. And so he spends the whole story, but he's not really, anyway. Yeah, he's chasing down his wife and the Nova. So it's just different things, but they're mainly, like I say, they're not, Abdullah the Butcher in Gotham. Some of these have been published in other places. Some of them are brand new and only available here. There was a magazine that I really, really wanted to get into. And I had sent them a couple of things, and they had turned me down. And they had a call out for wrestling stories. They wanted wrestling stories. And I don't know anything about wrestling.
Right.
My grandfather was kind of into it, and I watched a little bit of it, but I never, bit that hook.
Yeah.
But I wanted it in this magazine, so I made up a story about a bunch of kids in the 60s, because it was me still basically living out in Alvarado, and me and my mom, we stuck out like sore thumbs out in Alvarado that would have been 71, I guess, 72, because my mom was divorced, and so you didn't do that stuff in the 60s and 70s, and so we were kind of set apart from everybody else, and there's a bunch of kids getting together, and they're all going to play superheroes, and they're all fighting over who's going to be Superman and Batman and Aquaman and all this stuff, and this one kid wants to be Abdullah the Butcher, who was a big he was a villain wrestler at that time.
Okay.
And they're like, he's not a superhero, and he's like, oh yeah, well, watch this, and this kid just knows some wrestling moves and just kind of beats the crap out of some of the other kids with the wrestling moves. And you're like, who's the superhero now?
So you took the story, submitted it to the magazine, and got a spot.
They got it. They took it. Yes, they did. Yes, they did. So I got, there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to diving into that one too. But We're for Smoke, with the amount of history and the obvious research that you put into this, it's a work of art.
I always want to say that I did do a lot of research on this, but I'm a writer. I'm not a historian. But luckily I have made friends with a lot of historians, and I know a lot of the archivists in all the libraries around here. And so when you hang out in those places, like I told you, Bessie was the inspiration, was the first character I fell in love with in this book. I was at the downtown library years ago researching something else, and this woman, a librarian, came up to me with a little manila folder and said, "Mark, I found this stuff. I've been working on it. I thought you would like it." And she gave it to me, and she collected all the newspaper stories about Bessie that are in the book. And I just started reading about this woman, and I was like, holy moly, this woman is amazing.
Yeah.
And so yes, I do research, but I don't do the dirty research.
Oh, sure.
They come to me and hand me, or I'm like, hey, I want to know about this. And they're like, I mean, they live for that stuff.
Well, and that's the thing. A historian is not going to put together a book like We're for Smoke.
Right.
Something very easily digestible for somebody like me, and enjoyable. A historian can't do that. Mark Noble can do that.
Well,
so,
thank you.
Not to take anything away. We got to tell our listeners a little bit about Bessie, though, because that is a really powerful character that you put into the book. So she was 12 years old whenever she comes into the story, somewhere in that
as
age.
best as I can tell.
Yeah. And she was left on the streets of Fort Worth. I can't remember what area, but close to Hell's Half Acre.
Yeah.
And just kind of left there to starve to death. And back then, if you didn't have somebody to take care of you at that age, you would just starve to death, especially in that area of town. So she becomes a lady of the night very quickly. She gets picked up by somebody that sees her as a tool that can be used to make them more profit. And I guess by the age of 17, she's been arrested multiple times and finds herself into the is it the first county lockup here in Fort Worth?
I think that would have been probably the second version. See, that's why I'm not a historian.
Yeah.
But I think that was the second jail.
So the building is just falling apart, and she's able to basically claw her way through the wall using a piece of metal out of a drain.
Yeah.
And she does this so many times consecutively that eventually the city is forced to build a new jailhouse because they can't keep her ass inside.
Yeah, I mean, Bessie wasn't that they needed a new jail, So, but Bessie sort of
She was the catalyst.
brought the attention to it. This woman. There's one picture of her. It's not in the book because it's horrible. It's a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy of a newspaper article, but it's her standing on the steps of the courthouse, and she can't be any bigger than a minute. I mean, she doesn't look like she's maybe 5'4", 5'5" at most. And back then everybody was, they didn't have the high, fructose corn syrup that we get.
Right. Everybody was a lot thinner.
Everybody was a lot thinner, so she couldn't have been 100 pounds.
Yeah. And if you were broke like Bessie, you were a lot thinner.
Yeah. And so she's either picking the locks or literally digging the stone out of the mortar and then dropping out. And there's a quote in there, I can just hear it in my head in one of the newspaper stories. The reporter asked the sheriff or chief of police, because she broke out of the Tarrant County Jail and this Fort Worth City Jail. I think they kind of argued about who, you take her. You take her. No, I'm not taking her. But they, how many times does this make that Bessie has broken out? And his reply is just, "We've quit counting." And I can just hear his old broken soul.
The defeat.
We've quit counting. But yeah, her backstory, I'll be honest here. I made up the backstory because she was just a woman who broke out of jail a lot, but she was nobody, and there was no such thing as record keeping,
right,
and things of that nature. So she just started appearing in the newspaper for breaking out of the jail, and got famous. So I made up her backstory, but then everything from once she makes the paper, that stuff is mostly true. The fight she got into and the problems she had and the issues that came into her life, and it.
Well, you get to take those liberties with the story because it's yours. But the way that you delivered Bessie to the reader, it certainly paints the picture for Fort Worth in that time period, Hell's Half Acre, and just what a miserable, awful place it really was. the television show 1883 that we've been watching popularizes 1883 Fort Worth and what it was like back then. And this was a rough ass place. You didn't come here unless you had to, I don't think. And that's what, in your book, Fort Worth was trying to turn that around. Dallas was in the process of doing that too. And that's why they kicked Kid out of Dallas, because Dallas was, Kid was in Dallas as I believe a sheriff, right? And then he was involved in a murder and he had to go because we don't need people like you giving us a bad rap.
Yep.
And Fort Worth was right behind them trying to do the same thing because we were in stiff competition with them trying to build up our cities. So, but I can't wait to finish it. And I'm going to be looking for more books like this, either by Mark Nobles or otherwise, because this was fascinating to me, just the amount of history in here and some of the stuff that they're citing in this book and in the Rock and Roll Roots. I know that place, or I wonder if that's over by that one spot that I'm familiar with. Throughout page by page almost. So that's really cool because you're kind of, since I'm familiar with Fort Worth, I'm almost a character in the book. Kind of feels connected to me. So,
and I do try, and I will go and look up, where they were and what the streets and put that in, even if it's not always in Fort Worth. If anytime that I'm writing a piece set back in time, I will go and that's the great thing about the internet these days is you can go and pull up and look at the old maps and the streets, what they were, because some of the streets change.
Oh yeah,
and stuff. So,
and that's another big takeaway from both of these is the difference in how we record data. I mean, just talking about the 45s in Rock and Roll Roots, and bands didn't just record their music. They didn't have the money for it. It was a very timely process. There was a lot of equipment involved with that. So if you were recording anything on a 45, then you're pretty well off. Not just every garage band could do that.
Fort Worth has been really, really lucky in, especially in music. That there's been, the music history in Fort Worth is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's incredible, and it goes all the way back from talking earlier about Western swing. A ton of great jazz musicians have come out of Fort Worth, country, rock and roll people, and there was a character, Major Bill Smith, in the 60s, and his first big hit was Hey Baby with Bruce Chanel, and then he also did Hey Paula. I don't know what his thing was with the hay, but anyway.
Hello wasn't around yet?
Yeah, right. He would record anybody that he thought he could sell. He would turn around and sell it to a big label.
Yeah.
And so we had more than our fair share of songs that were recorded, and they're just, I firmly believe with all my heart that there is something in the water in Fort Worth that creates phenomenal musicians. And I've talked to, in different periods and in different genres, in talking with people in the Western swing and country, which people will don't ever say that Western swing is country. They're different.
You've been warned.
Yes. Yeah. People that were involved in the Western swing music and in country music and in blues, Fort Worth has a great blues history. And I've talked to people in different eras, from the 70s, 60s, 80s, that the one thing about Fort Worth that makes it different than other places is that the musicians in Fort Worth, if you were a musician, you were just a musician. And so it didn't matter if you were in a country band and you were hanging out with somebody in a blues band, they'd sit around and trade licks and talk about the business. Yeah. And so Fort Worth, it's a conglomerate. That's why I think part of the reason why Western swing, which is a conglomeration of jazz and folk and country and Tejana, I mean, all these different ethnicities and different genres of music blended together, is because in Fort Worth it was just like, hey, how do you do that? That's cool. And so the musicians here have always interacted with each other across genres, and it has made them all better, and made us as listeners.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, episode, I think 62, singer-songwriter. There's an event that was going on and was intended to go through the month of March, but unfortunately, I guess there were some logistical issues and they had to cancel it. But that's what they were doing. You've got people getting together and just musicians coming in from San Antonio, Denton, Dallas, all over the place, and meeting at a central place down there on 7th Street. And that's exactly what they're doing. And then by going there and interviewing some of these artists, they invited me out to these other singer-songwriter things that I had no idea were going on, but that's what they explained to me. That's what they're doing. They're sitting around a campfire at one of these bars and just picking away and trying different stuff and trading ideas. And so that's just fascinating to me. And Fort Worth Roots was never supposed to be a music podcast, but I've found kind of a cool group of people that are more than happy to get on the mic and talk about their music and where they came from and all that. And I'm happy to have them on. So, but yeah, there is definitely that's been kind of a central theme for the last 30 episodes that we've done on Fort Worth Roots is the powerful community of artists that we have here in the Fort Worth area, and there might be something in the water, Mark.
It really is, and I'm happy because I've kind of like I say, I'm older. I don't go out and hit the scene much anymore, but I'm glad that it's still going on because that is a long tradition here in Fort Worth, and I was surprised to learn that it's not that way in a lot of other places. Yeah,
Fort Worth has something special going on, and we're right at the cross intersection of creativity and a surplus of population. I think you get as big as Dallas, things are moving too fast to slow down to enjoy things like local music.
Yeah,
but here it's kind of and there was a thing in your book that really resonated with me, talking about the Rolling Stones showed up at the Will Rogers Center or whatever, and they had invited a local, it might have been the Elites.
I think it was.
So they were supposed to have the Elites, a local Fort Worth band, join them, open up for the Rolling Stones. And at the end, last minute, I guess the manager for the Rolling Stones said, we don't want these local guys stealing our spotlight, so we're not going to have them out. So I canceled on it. Well, that night in Fort Worth's Rock and Roll Roots, the Rolling Stones, they go ahead, they move forward with it. Well, I guess everybody decided to go to a Tina Go-Go or something else that night because the Rolling Stones sold 200 tickets. And, right down the street at another Tina Go-Go, there were 500 to 1,000 people at a skating rink.
Yeah.
Watching the Elites. So.
Well, I mean, you have to understand that
we like our local bands.
We do. Well, and that's just, there was no such thing really as a rock and roll as an industry at that point. Everybody was making it up.
Right.
And it wasn't uncommon for, touring acts to have a local band open to get a crowd, to get their following in there. So everybody was just kind of making it up as they went along. But yeah, it's funny. But a lot of these guys did, they're 16 years old.
Right.
And they're hanging out in the cattle barns with Keith and Mick, just drinking warm Dr. Pepper and eating hot dogs and then going on stage and doing whatever they do. Everybody was just trying to figure out what was going on back then.
Yeah.
And it's weird. Those stories are, and just, you should watch the documentary.
I'm gonna have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I find it on YouTube, I'll add a link to the show notes so people can find it.
Because these guys are storytellers and they've got some stories for sure.
Oh, that's so awesome.
And I want to just plug Melissa again. Melissa Kirkendall, who directed this, she did all the interviews and she really got them to tell some great stories.
And is she a Fort Worth resident?
Yeah, not anymore. She's mainly down in Austin.
Okay.
Right now working, but she's working in film. She's directing. She's producing. She's doing all kinds of stuff. So she's still out there working.
Well, I'll have to try to.
She's in town every once in a while. I will definitely put you in contact with her.
I love indie film makers and people working on projects like that. We've had one group of indie filmmakers on, and they were nice enough to give me a Blu-ray copy of their indie film. I'm going to forget the name of it. The Bob Zula. Oh, is that right? Yeah. The Bob Zula. You've never heard of it, I promise.
But now that I have, I need to see it.
Well, I'll let you borrow that Blu-ray. I want it back, though, Mark.
Okay. I'm not sure. I don't have a Blu-ray player. Right?
Well, I just got lucky. One of my DVD players had the Blu-ray option on it. But it's just incredible what people can do with just motivation, because some of these filmmakers, and I'm sure you've had situations like this, where just coming up with the funding to see your project through can be a real issue. So to see what you can do with just motivation is pretty incredible. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that I'm really curious about, is indie filmmaking or projects or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
So
it's a whole different animal, man. That's why I don't do film anymore. You spend most of your time really just walking around begging for money, and instead of being creative and making stuff.
The logistics of it.
Man, with a script, that's somebody else's job. I'll write your script if you've already begged for money and can pay me for it.
Right.
Or the books and novels, it's just me and my computer. Nobody's hounding me. As long as I can keep the electricity on,
that's all you need
to fire it up. I'm good.
Yeah, that's awesome. You had mentioned, I think earlier, that there was another project that you're working on, or a book outside of this one. Maybe I misunderstood.
I have two projects going on right now. Another historical fiction novel.
Awesome.
That I'm still in the middle of researching and gathering things. I've kind of started playing around with it. I'm really, really excited about the direction it's going, but I want to I'm kind of keeping that close to the vest right now.
Yeah, okay.
But it's historical fiction. It'll be set it's a little bit wider scope. It'll be set throughout Texas.
Okay.
And then I'm ghosting a book for a musician, one of these guys from the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, really mainly 60s and 70s. Mm-hmm. He's living down in Llano now. And this guy is a natural-born storyteller. I was going to mention him to you. His name is Burl Wilkerson.
Burl?
Burl.
Okay.
And he's, oh my gosh. He talk about, I'll do that just because I might get a story. Burl he just does things, or he did, and he's got a million stories. And so I'm working with him, putting together his biography. Burl will just tell you straight up that, most of it happened this way, makes a good story. I mean, he's a singer-songwriter, He takes real things and real emotions and then makes something more beautiful out of it. And I've had such a great time getting to know him and meet him, and we're plugging along on that book. I'm hoping to have it finished maybe by the summer.
Okay. Well, let me know. I'd be very honored to have you back on the show and talk about the new work. And
absolutely, I appreciate it.
So, so I'm going to put show links in there for the Amazon links. Do you have a website or anything you want people to kind of connect with you on?
I don't have it. I'm on Facebook. It's just I think it's Mark Noble's film and book page. I'm a horrible marketer.
Well, it's okay.
Look me up on Facebook.
It will be in the show notes. It will definitely be in the show notes. And thank you for these. These were fascinating, and I'm looking forward to that next fictional historical book you're making.
It's going to be a doozy.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Morgan's going to take our picture. You got to come over here and take our picture. Okay. And I got to be good from this angle because I can see both. Awesome. Mark, you want to kind of hold that up?
Yeah.
Count 3. 1, 2. Good.
That's it. You did it. Okay.
Ooh, thank you.
Well, my camera crapped out on me, so that's going to be.
I was like, I'm staying in front of it. I don't see
No, yeah, I screwed that up. It's okay. So that picture will be on the video. Mark, thank you again.
Thank you.
And anytime you want to be on Fort Worth Roots, or you want to get together and just have a beer, let me know.
Terrific. I will take you up on it.
Fort Worth Roots, thank y'all for listening, and we will see you next week. A huge thank you to Mark Nobles for being on the Fort Worth Roots podcast. My friend, Mark, you are always welcome on the show. This was a sincere treat getting to read these books and then sit down with the author and just kind of talk shop. That was so much fun. Looking forward to do it again. I have another book that he gave me while we were hanging out, Metaphor in a Hat, Volume 1. Have not cracked into this, but the first two books were just so incredible, and the history that was in them. made it so much fun. I don't know if this one's going to have much Fort Worth stuff in it. Doesn't look like it. But man, it's thick. This is going to be good. Squad STX. Don't forget squadstx.com. Take your boys outside. It's going to be a memory they'll never forget. My brightest memories as a kid are hanging out with the folks, state parks or camping trips. It's money well spent. Check it out. SquadSTX.com. River Oaks Springfest Car Show, April 30th. If you have not written this down on your calendar yet, you got to do it. Last episode, I talked a little bit about, there were some other details that were coming down the pipe that I couldn't talk about yet, but I was aware of some stuff. Well, anyway, the Oscar Meyer Wiener mobile is going to be at the show. And, if you have no other reason to come to this thing, show up just to see a giant hot dog on wheels, right? Anyway, that's going to be cool. So, come check that out. What else? That's it. Those are the notes, right? Okay. Check us out. Hey, if you haven't found us on social media yet, go check us out. I'm most active on Facebook. And what we do on that Fort Worth Roots Facebook page is we share all the upcoming events and information for guests that have been on the show in the past, and just try to keep you up to date with what they're doing, the ins and outs of all the activities in Fort Worth. This weekend, Friday, actually, me and Morgan, we were out getting dinner, early dinner, and we were over there off of 7th Street. I said, you know what, let me check out the Fort Worth Roots Facebook page and see what I'm forgetting. Who's down here? And right down the street, there's Carrie and Paul from the band Late to the Station. They were playing at Kung Fu Saloon, which is a pretty cool little place. If y'all ever go there, get the hamburger egg rolls. I know that sounds weird, but they're delicious. Anyway, just all that to tell you, just if you go on the Fort Worth Roots Facebook page, it is a great resource to just on the fly quickly figure out what's going on in the area. If you find yourself needing something to do or wanting to go support local musicians or whatever, if it's happening and I'm aware of it, I'm going to share it on the Fort Worth Roots Facebook page. So we're also on TikTok and Instagram and all that, and it seems like it's the easiest on Facebook to share people's information. So that's where you can get that. Another shout out to our Patreons, Angela Walker and Justin Matenta. Thank y'all for supporting the show on Patreon. Very, very appreciative of that. It's the most sincere way for people to say we support your show and we appreciate what you're doing. So gives me the warm fuzzies when people do that. Thank you so much. That's it. What do we got next? Next Monday is going to be with Tanya Hauk, and we're going to get into some good conversations about what she's doing professionally, taking care of kiddos, getting them placed in foster homes and through an adoption agency. And I do not have all those notes in front of me, so make sure you check that out next Monday. That is a really good conversation. Morgan joins us and uses her academic prowess to ask the right questions, and but let's see. Excuse me. Tanya's organization is going to be at the River Oaks Springfest Car Show, and they're going to be talking about what they do there too. So anyway, just a good conversation, and there's also a lot of history involved with what Tanya does with Fort Worth, and I need to dig into that, and I need to sit down with Tanya and really get into the history side of it, because we didn't touch a lot on that, but there's a ton of history there. So all right, I'm babbling again. I did actually have somebody tell me a couple weeks ago that they enjoy the babbles, which is, that's positive reinforcement to a negative activity, I think. So I didn't need that, but so we'll just keep with the babbles. I don't think I have anything else. That's what I'm doing when I babble. I'm like, don't turn it off yet. You're forgetting something. But I think I got it all. I think I got all the notes. Go check out Mark A. Noble's. Go get these books. They belong on your bookshelf. These are two that you need to have. They don't take up a ton of room either. I mean, they're thin. We're for Smoke. Let's see how many pages this got in it. I keep them here in the studio. 201 pages. It's a thin book, easy read. Shoot through it in a day, no problem. Fort Worth Roots Rock and Roll. Fort Worth's Rock and Roll Roots is even thinner. It's got 127 pages in it. And these pictures are incredible. I mean, the book itself, the stories in it are great, but the pictures are really incredible too. You're just gonna have to see it to appreciate it. And there's a lot of history in here that has nothing to do with rock and roll, more just Fort Worth stuff. This was something that kind of changed Eamon. I always say it wrong. Eamon G Carter. This gentleman is now one of my heroes from local history. I'll read this to you real quick. Eamon G. Carter was one of Fort Worth's biggest benefactors and promoters. Arriving in Fort Worth in 1906, Carter published the Star-Telegram and used his pulpit to tout the town's attractions. He coined the city motto, Fort Worth, where the West begins, and almost single-handedly talked Franklin Roosevelt into awarding Fort Worth the bomber plant that fueled the economy from World War II on and attracted other defense and technology business to the area. Carter epitomized the national perception of the Stetson-wearing, storytelling, hard-drinking Texan and was a nationally recognized businessman. Carter did not invent the heated rivalry between Fort Worth and Dallas, but he certainly raised it to a new level by building Casa Mañana to upstage the Dallas Centennial celebration and by always taking a sack lunch whenever he traveled to Dallas so he would not have to spend any money there. He once participated in a ceremony at the county line between Tarrant and Dallas counties to officially bury the hatchet between the two cities. Carter and other leaders from both Fort Worth and Dallas were each presented with with hatchets and shovels to bury them together. As the ceremony was finishing, it was mentioned to Carter that the handle of his hatchet was still sticking out of the ground. Carter replied that he was well aware and that he might need his hatchet later. So anyway, there's a ton of stuff like that, just little stories like that throughout this book, Fort Worth's Rock and Roll Roots. Incredible read. You got to get it. Amazon is the easiest way to get it, and they're not expensive. I'm not going to quote the price off for you, but they were not expensive. Cheaper than the admission at a theater to watch one of them movies. So anyway, all right, that's it. This is like record-breaking babbling. Thank y'all so much for being here. Like I say all the time, every single time you stream even one of these episodes, it improves our analytics, which strengthens the show. And, these magical algorithms that these computer people, pixel people, make up to decide what you're going to see whenever you search for stuff. Whenever you pull up our website, whenever you stream one of our episodes, it gets those little algorithm monsters together and lets them know that you're interested in this kind of stuff. So it'll push us up in the rankings and make it easier for people to find us. So you genuinely are doing something whenever you listen to the show. So thank you very, very much. I'm going to shut the hell up. Thank you for listening to the show, and I will see you next Monday with Tanya Hauk. All right. Y'all have a good week. Love you. Bye.